The most famous fact about the Great Wall of China is a lie. For generations, people have repeated the same sentence in classrooms, documentaries, and travel shows that the Great Wall is the only man-made structure visible from space. It sounds impressive, almost poetic, a monument so massive that it rises above the planet itself. But when astronauts actually looked down from orbit nearly 250 miles above Earth, the wall vanished. It blended into the mountains, dissolved into the same dust and rock it was built from, and became almost impossible to see. And strangely, that illusion is the perfect metaphor for the wall itself. Because the deeper scientists, historians, and engineers have studied this structure, the clearer one thing becomes. Almost everything people think they know about it is wrong. From a distance, it looks like a simple defensive barrier, a long stone fence stretching across northern China. But up close, it reveals something far more complicated. Hidden inside its bricks are engineering techniques centuries ahead of their time, secret passages designed for surprise attacks, and materials so durable that modern machines struggle to break them. In some places, the wall was built with a strange ingredient no one expected. In others, it was constructed from nothing but sand reeds and salt water, and somehow survived for 2,000 years. But the most unsettling discovery is not about how the wall was built. It's about how it failed. Because after nearly 2 millennia of construction, after millions of workers and unimaginable resources, the greatest defensive structure in human history was not destroyed by armies or weapons. It was defeated by something much simpler: human nature. And once you understand that story, the Great Wall stops being just a monument of stone. It becomes a warning written across history itself. For centuries, the Great Wall of China has been described in the simplest possible terms: a massive barrier built to keep enemies out. Stretching across mountains, deserts, and valleys for more than 13,000 miles, it appears at first glance to be nothing more than an enormous stone fence separating civilizations. From a distance, the logic feels obvious: build a wall high enough, long enough, and strong enough, and no invading army will be able to cross it. That idea has shaped how generations of people imagine the wall as an impenetrable shield guarding the heart of an empire. But history rarely obeys simple explanations. When modern researchers began studying the wall more carefully, using archaeology, engineering analysis, and high-resolution satellite imagery, they discovered something far more complex hidden behind those familiar bricks. The wall was never a single structure built at one moment in time. It was a constantly evolving system constructed and reconstructed by multiple dynasties over nearly 2,000 years. Some sections were built from stone and brick, others from packed earthwood or desert sand hardened by minerals. In certain regions, the wall rises dramatically along jagged mountain ridges, while in others it fades into subtle lines across open plains. What appears today as one continuous monument is actually a vast network of fortifications, watchtowers, signal stations, supply routes, and defensive layers stretching across northern China. In other words, the Great Wall was not merely architecture, it was infrastructure, strategy, and survival combined into a single monumental system. And the deeper historians look into its design, the more it becomes clear that this wall was never meant to simply stand still and wait for enemies. It was designed to think, react, and control the landscape around it. When modern restoration teams began repairing remote sections of the Great Wall in the late 20th century, they expected the job to be routine. After centuries of exposure to wind, rain, and temperature extremes, the ancient mortar holding the bricks together should have been fragile, something that heavy machinery could easily break apart. Engineers brought in excavators weighing tens of thousands of pounds, their steel buckets designed to tear through reinforced concrete. But the moment the metal teeth struck the wall, something strange happened. The bucket bounced back. The operators tried again, hitting the same section harder. Sparks flew from the impact, the machine groaned under the force, yet the mortar barely cracked. What should have been a simple demolition suddenly turned into a baffling problem. Modern equipment was losing a battle against 600-year-old masonry. At first, the workers suspected exaggeration or unusually strong stone, but engineers soon collected samples of the mortar and sent them to laboratories for analysis. The results shocked the scientists studying them. Hidden inside the ancient mixture was an ingredient so ordinary that it seemed almost impossible: sticky rice. Builders during the Ming Dynasty had discovered a remarkable formula by combining slaked lime with thick rice porridge. Chemically, the rice contained amylopectin, a complex carbohydrate that interacted with lime in a way that strengthened the entire structure. Instead of forming brittle crystals like traditional mortar, the mixture created a dense and flexible microstructure capable of absorbing stress. Over time, as the wall aged and absorbed carbon dioxide from the air, the material continued to harden rather than decay. What the ancient builders had unknowingly produced was an early form of composite construction material, something astonishingly resilient against earthquakes, weather, and time itself. In a strange twist of history, one of the strongest construction materials ever used in architecture was born not in a laboratory or industrial factory, but in a kitchen pot. The Great Wall, in some of its most enduring sections, owes its strength to something as humble as rice. For centuries, a darker story has followed the Great Wall wherever travelers go. Long before archaeologists arrived with modern tools, people whispered that the wall was not built only from stone and mortar, but from the bodies of the workers who died constructing it. According to legend, when laborers collapsed from exhaustion, starvation, or disease, their bodies were sealed directly into the wall to save time and avoid digging graves in the harsh terrain. Over generations, this idea grew into one of the most haunting myths in Chinese history, that the Great Wall was the longest graveyard on Earth. The story became inseparable from the famous legend of Ming Jiangnu, a young woman whose husband had been taken away to work on the wall shortly after their wedding. Determined to find him, she traveled across mountains and plains for more than 1,000 miles, carrying warm clothes for the winter she feared he would face. When she finally arrived at the construction site, she learned the truth that shattered her world. Her husband had died from exhaustion, and no one could tell her where his body had been buried. Overcome with grief, the legend says she collapsed at the foot of the wall and wept so bitterly that a section of the structure crumbled, revealing piles of bones hidden within the stones. For centuries, this story fueled the belief that human remains were part of the wall itself. But when modern archaeologists began studying the structure with careful excavation and ground analysis, they found no skeletons inside the masonry. The explanation was painfully practical. Engineers of the past understood that organic material decomposes, leaving cavities that would weaken the structure and eventually cause collapse. Embedding bodies inside a defensive wall would have been disastrous. Instead, researchers discovered mass graves near construction sites where thousands of laborers were buried after they died during the project. The wall may not contain their bones, but it undeniably carries the weight of their sacrifice. When people imagine the Great Wall of China, they usually picture a gray ribbon of stone winding across lush green mountains near Beijing, its towers rising dramatically above forested ridges. But travel far to the west into the brutal emptiness of the Gobi Desert and that familiar image dissolves. Here, there are no stone quarries, no forests to supply timber, and no nearby cities capable of producing millions of bricks. The land stretches endlessly in waves of dust and rock, where scorching summer heat can climb above 110 degrees Fahrenheit and winter winds slice across the plains like blades. It seems like the last place on Earth where anyone could build a fortress meant to last centuries. Yet the wall continues even here, though at first glance it hardly looks like a human creation. Instead of tall stone battlements, visitors see long weathered ridges rising gently from the desert floor, almost like natural dunes sculpted by the wind. But a closer look reveals something impossible for nature to produce: straight lines running across the landscape for miles, marking the remains of one of the oldest sections of the Great Wall, built more than 2,000 years ago during the Han Dynasty. Faced with an environment that offered almost no traditional building materials, ancient engineers were forced to improvise with whatever the desert provided. They layered bundles of reeds and brushwood, then packed sand and gravel on top, repeating the process again and again, like the layers of a giant structural sandwich. The crucial element that transformed this fragile mixture into a durable barrier was salt water, drawn from nearby mineral lakes. As the water evaporated under the desert sun, salt crystals formed between grains of sand, binding the layers together into a hardened mass. Over time, the structure behaved much like reinforced concrete, with plant fibers acting as internal reinforcement and crystallized salt functioning as natural cement. Against all expectations, this desert wall survived centuries of sandstorms, proving that even in the harshest landscape, human ingenuity could carve permanence out of nothing but sand and salt. For centuries, historians believed they understood the basic purpose of the Great Wall. It was a barrier, a colossal shield meant to keep enemies out and protect the Chinese heartland from northern invasions. When travelers walk along the restored sections today, that assumption feels perfectly logical. The wall stretches across the horizon in solid stone rising 30 feet high in some places, with watchtowers standing like silent sentinels over the mountains. From the outside, it appears continuous, unbroken, and impenetrable. No gates, no openings, nothing that an invading army could exploit. But in recent years, technology has begun to reveal details that generations of observers simply could not see. In 2022, a group of researchers launched one of the most detailed aerial surveys ever conducted along the wall, using high-resolution drones capable of mapping the surface down to the smallest structural variations. As the digital models slowly formed on their computer screens, analysts noticed something strange hidden in the brick patterns. In certain places, the layout of the stones shifted slightly, almost invisibly, as if someone had carefully repaired the surface centuries ago. When archaeologists traveled to these locations and examined them in person, they made a discovery that transformed the entire understanding of the wall's military design. These were not repairs, they were doors. More than 100 hidden passages were embedded directly into the structure, each disguised with such precision that from the outside they appeared identical to the surrounding masonry. Yet from the inside, soldiers could break through the thin outer layer of bricks in seconds. The Great Wall was never meant to trap defenders behind stone. Instead, it allowed them to emerge suddenly and strike where enemies least expected. What seemed like a static barrier was, in reality, a carefully engineered battlefield. Now imagine a cold morning along the northern frontier, sometime around the year 1400. A lone soldier stands on a watchtower hundreds of miles from the nearest major city. The mountains stretch endlessly around him, silent and empty beneath a pale sky. Then, far on the horizon, something changes. A cloud of dust begins to rise where the land meets the sky. It is not wind. It is movement, thousands of horses racing toward the border. In most parts of the medieval world, such a sight would mean disaster. A messenger would need days, perhaps a week, to reach the capital and warn the emperor. By the time reinforcements arrived, villages would already be burning. But along the Great Wall, the defenders possessed something astonishingly advanced, for its time a communication network that could carry urgent information across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. Watchtowers were positioned roughly 3 to 5 miles apart, each within sight of the next, forming an unbroken chain across the frontier. During the day, soldiers ignited special fuel mixtures that produced thick, dark smoke columns visible for miles against the sky. Historical records describe unusual ingredients in these signal fires: sulfur, saltpeter, and even dried wolf dung, which created dense smoke that rose in stable vertical plumes. Each column of smoke carried meaning. One signal indicated a small raiding party. 2 meant several hundred enemy riders. 3 signaled a force numbering in the thousands. When night fell, the system shifted seamlessly to fire beacons and lantern flashes, repeating the same coded messages in light. The warning leapt from tower to tower across mountains and valleys like a chain reaction. Within hours, news of an approaching army could travel nearly 600 miles to the imperial court. Long before telegraph satellites or fiber optic cables, the Great Wall had already become something extraordinary, an ancient nervous system for an empire. For nearly 2,000 years, the Great Wall stood as the ultimate symbol of security. Dynasties invested enormous wealth, labor, and time into extending and reinforcing it, believing that if the barrier was long enough, high enough, and strong enough, no invading army could ever penetrate it. Millions of workers hauled stone-mixed mortar and raised watchtowers across mountains and deserts, all for a single promise that this wall would protect the empire forever. By the early 13th century, however, a new power was rising on the northern plains. The Mongol armies led by Genghis Khan moved with terrifying speed, conquering territories across Asia, with a discipline and mobility few had ever seen. Logically, the Great Wall should have stopped them. Its fortifications towered above the landscape, its watchtowers stretched for hundreds of miles, and its signal system could warn entire provinces within hours. Yet when the Mongols reached the frontier, history took a turn no engineer could have predicted. There were no legendary sieges at the base of the wall, no endless waves of soldiers trying to climb its battlements. Instead, the gates opened. Genghis Khan understood a brutal truth about power walls are built from stone, but they are guarded by human beings. And humans can be persuaded. The Mongols offered gold protection and positions of authority to exhausted garrison commanders, who had gone months without pay and felt abandoned by distant rulers. Faced with impossible choices, some chose survival over loyalty. The gates that no army could break were opened from within. In that moment, the greatest defensive structure in human history revealed its weakest point. The flaw was never in the stone. It was always in the human heart. Today, the Great Wall stretches across northern China like a scar written into the landscape, a monument that has outlived emperors, armies, and entire dynasties. It was built to divide the world, to declare where one civilization ended and another began. Yet time has quietly transformed its meaning. The wall no longer separates enemies. It draws people together. Millions now walk its ancient stones not as soldiers, but as witnesses to human ambition, ingenuity, and endurance. In the end, the Great Wall teaches a paradox. The strongest walls we build cannot protect us forever, but they can remind us what humanity is capable of when determination refuses to accept the impossible.